Welcome back, fellow mitochondriacs, for another episode of Cancer is a Mitochondrial Metabolic Disease. Today, we're going to be dropping part two of the podcast with Professor Thomas Seager. And in this particular part of the podcast, we're going to be discussing what kind of effects have been found looking at CGM or continuous blood glucose monitoring data during and after cold, as well as ketones. We're going to talk about how the cortisol and catecholamine stress response acts in regard to cold water immersion. We're going to look at changes with A1C with cold water immersion and why maybe there is a lack of studies looking at metabolic conditions and cold water immersion. We're going to talk a little bit about the optimum temperature, duration, and frequency of cold water immersion. We're going to dive into if whether or not he has had any anecdotal stories of folks having cancer improvement or regression using cold water immersion as part of their healing, and much, much more. One thing you mentioned was the CGM data. And this is why I'm so glad you brought it up because I wanted to know if you had data about this because there's no studies per se, but I'm sure you have people who do it. We know that the cold is going to have a catecholamine response, a cortisol response, like you said, and there's going to be a spike. But overall, like during cold, you're saying you're seeing it come down during cold. I've seen it
Yeah.
where it's like after cold, but during cold as well, too. That's very fascinating.
The catecholamine response is exaggerated. When you bring people naive to the cold into the lab and you dump them in there, you get especially among people who do not have high cortisol levels already, you get a cortisol spike. Now, the best work on this is done at the Lithuanian Sports University, where a friend of mine, Marius Brazaitis, he's got a Morozko and he's setting these up and he's drawing blood and things. What he found is that if the people are already elevated in cortisol, cold does not push them up further. And
Interesting.
so your body probably understands that there's some, of course, there are feedback mechanisms in the body. Your body probably understands that you've got some level of cortisol and more isn't going to help. When you run the studies for longer, a couple of weeks, as people acclimate to the cold, they don't get the same catecholamine response. And this makes sense. We know there's this principle called stress inoculation, where you initially a novel stressor will create a big response. And as you become acclimated to that stressor, it's less and less and less. We can use this to help people get over their fear of spiders, for example, where we titrate the stress until their physiological and psychological response is more subdued. The same thing happens with the cold. When it comes to the CGM data, there's something very analogous that's very interesting. Took a type 2 diabetic, and he was running about 220 on his blood glucose. We put him into the cold. There was no spike. The body knows you've got plenty of glucose. He went from 220 down to 140 over the course of a few minutes.
Wow.
Now, when my son, when I sort of tried to bring him down that fast, he didn't feel real well.
Yeah.
Like if I'd given him
Most
too
people
much
don't.
H, I was worried and he would come crashing down. He would feel in his metabolism something was off. But this subject, he's running from 220 down to 140, and 140 is still too high, but
Oh,
for
yeah.
him, it was an
It's
excellent
the
reading.
relative
And he
change.
felt,
That's what I've noticed with
yeah.
diabetics. If you put them even like again, like you said, 140, that relative change is what then makes them feel hypoglycemic. It's interesting.
The person that we had healthy, no type 2 diabetes, no history of insulin resistance. She acclimated to the cold. She started about 85 on her CGM, popped up to 140, and then came down. And this was all over the course of 2 minutes.
Wow.
If your blood glucose level is already too high, you do not signal the liver to release additional glycogen. Like your liver knows you've got plenty of glucose. Sympathetic activation will not further increase your blood glucose levels. It turns out it's the same for cortisol. If your cortisol is already high, a cold bath is not going to elevate it further. If your cortisol is low, and people don't understand this, but PTSD is characterized by chronically low cortisol, not chronically high cortisol. If your cortisol is too low, that's also a problem. And you can stimulate the catecholamine response. You can bring the cortisol levels up using cold plunge therapy. It's important because there's one study, and this is talk therapy, which is ordinarily utterly ineffective for PTSD, but one study in which they artificially elevated cortisol levels in people undergoing conventional therapies for PTSD, and they got better outcomes by elevating their cortisol prior to the treatment for PTSD.
Hmm.
There's something going on in that whole stress response system that cold helps people modulate. And although there's a lot on social media about, oh, you're going to burn out your adrenals, which is not a thing, it is an error to think that if you're already stressed, oh no, don't add the cold stress on top of it. Your attitude towards the stress you're experiencing is more important than the stress that you're experiencing. This is work that Kelly McGonigal popularized in a book called The Upside of Stress. And she gave a wonderful TED talk that became, widely shared, saying it was the beliefs about stress that were important to mortality outcomes, not the level of stress itself. So when you say, you know what, this is a lot of stress, and this is going to make me stronger. This is something I need to do for my body to help me manage stress. Guess what? That's exactly what your body does. If you say, oh, this stress is killing me, guess what? You got one foot in the grave already. So the story
That's
you
very
tell
fascinating, by the way.
yourself about the stress is probably more important than the stress you're experiencing.
Okay. Based off of what you're talking about with the CGM data, is there because I couldn't find it. If you could find it and you can send it to me, I would be eternally grateful because I could not find it. PubMed search engine is horrible. Google's is way better. But that being said, I could not find a study on cold water immersion and A1C. There was one with like cinnamon, which was like a co-founding variable. But like, is there a study on A1C, or do you have a lot of, I don't know, case reports that you've been led into to know the average A1C drop with using cold water immersion?
I agree that that study doesn't exist. And I can tell you this because a friend of mine, Kevin Fontaine at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and we just submitted a proposal to the NIH. I don't know if Jay Bhattacharya is going to convince his program directors to actually fund work in chronic illness or whether they're just going to do the same goddamn thing
I
that they
know.
always fund, no matter what Jay tells them the, institute's priorities should be. But we submitted a proposal saying we want to track these metabolic markers over time so that people can come in and participate for weeks and perhaps we'll see a signal in their CGM data. As you know, HbA1c, we're talking about glycation. And so for the most part, this is an irreversible process. You would glycate your hemoglobin so that HB is hemoglobin, and then the A1C is saying how much of this is bound up. Glycation is the addition of a glucose, and
Right.
they never separate. Once the hemoglobin becomes glycated, it loses its function. They never separate. You have to wait for that to die. And so this makes it a slow, it's a rear view mirror marker. We might need months to really get a signal. Expensive studies always go like this. I brought some people into my lab, I did a thing, I drew some blood, I looked for an immediate response. Well, HbA1c isn't going to do that. It requires a lot of patience, and the patience has to be on the part of the investigator, on the part of the subjects, and on the part of the funding agency. There is as yet no funding agency that had said, sure, we got 6 months, because if you're going to take 6 months, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And on the other side of that has to be a patent for a new drug that you can convince insurance companies to compensate you for, or there's no return on investment. We've only asked for $250,000. We're going to bring obese people who are already undergoing treatment at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. We're going to ask them to get into the cold. We're going to ask them to persist with this for at least 2 weeks. And then we're going to look at a number of sort of what we call the fast tempo and the slower tempo. And we're hoping that we see the H1B, the HbA1c bend a little bit. If they volunteer to come back, over 6 or 8 weeks, then I know we're going to see it go down. And here's how I know. I measure mine. And when I started, I was 5.6, no big deal. Totally, nobody would worry about a fat professor in his 50s being at 5.6. Then I started doing ice baths every day, and I did it because I thought I was going to die of prostate cancer.
Hmm.
I came from 5.6 down to 5.2. Now you talk to Saladino, he's under 5 and he's eating honey and watermelon and all these fruits and things. I measure my testosterone. I haven't pulled my HbA1c in a couple of years, but I'm still looking at my triglyceride to HDL ratio. This is another marker of insulin resistance. When your triglycerides are high and your HDL is low, it's
Hmm.
because, or maybe I should put this differently, it's characteristic of insulin resistance. And I saw all of my measures that would be associated with improved insulin sensitivity move over the course of 3 to 4 months in a favorable direction because I was doing ice baths every day. And that includes my prostate specific antigen, which was up at 7 and came down to 1.1. I don't even think about it anymore.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I really hope you guys are able to get the funding. If nothing else, just having a couple people who have Morozgos and just be like, hey, check your A1C. It's $30. Check it in 3 months after using it and see. So it just seems like
Correct.
that study, even with a few people, could be very helpful to help us understand, like what the degree of lowering it is. They have it for cinnamon, they have it for chromium, they have it for berberine, they have it for every freaking thing, but they don't have it for cold. They don't have it for sauna. They don't have a lot of these data, and it's very frustrating. Okay. In that 2021 paper, it mentioned 3 levels of cold. It said mild, moderate, and high intensity. In that paper, I could not find what the difference was, how they characterized that by temperature. Were you able to figure out what the temperature differences were for those?
Here's the problem in cold exposure research. It has to date all been funded by the armies of cold countries. I mean, the United States, Norway, Sweden, these countries, they have a vested military interest in trying to understand how their soldiers are going to perform in the cold. And so
Interesting.
there's some very sophisticated thermodynamic models of the amount of clothing that the soldiers are wearing, and what's the wind and what's the humidity, and they're trying to measure how much heat is being extracted from the soldier's body. These are engineers, and they do good work in fluid mechanics and heat transfer, and they have no idea what the state of acclimation of the soldier's body is. I have yet to see one of these army studies that says, and here's how much, brown fat that soldier had. Here's what's going on with vasoconstriction in the soldier's limbs. The human body is equipped with mechanisms called thermoregulation, or mechanisms for thermoregulation, that will minimize the loss of heat to the environment to defend core body temperature and generate new heat inside the core when the body is exposed to cold. So all these military models are a bunch of crap because they don't know really what's happening inside the body or the soldier's prior state of cold training. There's a new model available, and I invented it and I published it. If you look for like optimal ice bath or guide to optimal ice bath, maybe it'll come up in Google. There's a certain cold comfort line. For me, about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. If the water is above 40, it's just boring because I'm in there every day. But for other people, 55 degrees Fahrenheit and they're getting the gas reflex and they're all activated. There's a certain cold comfort line at which you can maintain cold water immersion indefinitely. And yours and mine are going to be different. The first thing we need to do is establish that cold comfort line. And for a lot of people, 55 degrees, because they're naive to cold exposure, is a good place to start looking. Only the temperature below that cold comfort line is going to be significant. That cold comfort line is a measure of the extent to which the thermoregulatory mechanisms in the body are able to respond to cold exposure. Now we can begin a real study. Now we can say, how much heat are we actually extracting? What is the real cold dose or the real cold stress? So part of the reason that there's no definition of mild, moderate, or extreme that people intuitively think should exist is because there's no measure of the degree to which a human body is cold acclimated
Interesting.
until now.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I mean, I've always heard Dr. Cruz say that 55 degrees is like the kind of the ideal temperature, and that pretty much every 1 degree below your body temperature is beneficial, I guess, depending on the way you look at it from a whatever your perspective is. And I think that's kind of what I have, I guess, an issue with of trying to how figure out how we could potentially enhance metabolic therapies with cold is that a lot of the studies, whether it be the mice study that's where they had them at 4 degrees Celsius for 20 days, or some of the other human studies where they have people like just in a cold room for like 10 days, like how do you extrapolate that to 3 minutes in a cold plunge, 15 minutes in a cold plunge, what temperature, how much, body exposure, et cetera? Like how do you what would be the most ideal way to replicate, some of these studies that are really they're not done in water. They're not done at, intermittently
Okay,
even.
you're asking the question wrong.
Okay.
Um, I was at the Global Wellness Institute conference. You probably heard this story in another podcast. I was so frustrated. I had to leave early. I had to rush home. Oh, there's a fire at the production studio. And, I am frazzled. And sure enough, the cabbie picks me up. He's got me for 45 freaking minutes because I got to get to the Edinburgh airport. And he goes, "Oh, you're the cold plunge guy. What's the optimum temperature? What's the optimum duration? Tell me, what should I do?" And I snapped at this guy. And then, I took a little deep breath and I said, "Hang on a second. I get this question a lot. It's the wrong question. If you are going to start weight training, you wouldn't go to your coach and say, okay, so I want to know what's
That's
the
a great point.
optimum weight and the optimum number of reps for my new shoulder press exercise." Your coach would say, "Well, depends on how strong you are. It depends upon your prior state of weight training." And that's what I told this cabbie, after I got over myself. I said, "Well, how cold trained are you?" And of course, he has no idea. Nobody has any idea because there are not simple measures. The best way to do this is to start around 55 and ask, is that comfortable for you? Thermal neutrality is not 98.6 water. That water feels warm. Thermal neutrality for most people is in like the low 80s Fahrenheit. You say you get in here, you feel comfortable. And after you start dropping it, you start to, from below, 80 degrees, say, "Oh, this is a little cold." Where's your comfort line where you feel like I could be in here forever? Now, when Jack is talking 50, 55, that is an artifact of the equipment he had available. And I don't know, Jack at any moment could be on the verge of blocking me, right? For whatever I say. I don't really know because he hasn't really been into cold lately. But you pointed out at the time, you got to go down to the Quickie Mart. You got to get like 150 bags of ice. You got to
Right.
pour it into these troughs. You got to get in there. After you put in all that effort and you spend 45 minutes opening up the ice and like putting it in, there's two things that occur to you. The first thing is, I'll be damned if I'm only going to be in here for 2 minutes. Like, I'm going to
Exactly.
get my money's worth
Exactly.
out of all this, right? The second thing that occurs to you is, God, this is a lot of money. Wouldn't it be better if I could just like not buy so much ice? Going in for warmer and longer solves those two problems of you got to buy a lot of ice and it takes you a lot of time. Alexis Cowan, she has a Morosco. She can get in there any minute she wants. It is always ready for her. She doesn't have to buy anything. But she follows Jack's advice of doing like 45 minutes, 50 degrees. Casey, I don't have 45 minutes. I invented this machine, which is out on my porch right here, so I can get in there for 2 freaking minutes at the beginning of the day, which is exactly what I was doing when I was being late for this podcast, and get out
I
without
assume that's what you
feeling
were
like I
doing.
just wasted 45 minutes. I can go cold and short
Right.
because I have a Morozco that I can do it 3 times a day if I want, and I never have to visit the Quickie Mart. When you have a different machine available to you, it creates new affordances. You might be able to get the same heat extraction, the same cold dose, so to speak, in less time because you're going at a colder temperature. And it doesn't cost you more after you've got the machine. It's just a matter of fooling around with your settings so that it makes ice. When it's really cold and there's chunks floating of ice floating around there in the water, the psychological difference is noticeable. When Jack's talking about losing weight and leptin sensitivity and metabolism, I think you can probably achieve the same thing at about 38 degrees, 10 minutes, 50 degrees. I think there's an equivalency.
Hmm.
But when you're talking about psychological resilience, when you're talking about what Joe Rogan says, kill your inner bitch, you need the frickin' ice
Right.
floating around there in chunks. Tim Noakes, the South African physician, he's the one who supervised Lewis Pugh when Lewis Pugh was going to swim the Antarctic Ocean. And Tim Noakes has them all measured up. And Tim noticed that Pugh's core body temperature went up before he even got in the water.
Wow.
Noakes called it anticipatory
That's very
thermogenesis.
fascinating.
There's something happening in Lewis Pugh's mind that activates his brown fat, raises his core body temperature because he knows he's standing on a glacier and he
Right.
is about to jump in.
Right.
This has been observed in some of my customers as well. The relationship between the nervous system and the cold changes when you get down into those lower 30s. And that's really what I want.
I got you. To be fair, when you lowered your PSA from 7 to 1 ish, were you doing just minutes at a certain temperature? Like, what was your protocol to get there? Because I know there's a lot of people listening to this who have prostate, cancer, who would like to know just that.
3, 4 minutes. That's all I did every single day. Because, part of my reasoning was cold's good for inflammation.
Hmm.
But mostly I was desperate. I was like, I am not going to have my prostate removed. I am not going to go the rest of my life without being able to get an erection. I didn't even want the pain of a biopsy.
Right.
So I started cycling in and out of keto and doing my cold bath every day. When I got out, of course I was cold. I wasn't getting into the cold bath to kill my inner bitch. I wasn't getting into the cold bath because I was training for a triathlon or some other nonsense like this. I was getting into the cold bath because I was afraid I was going to die.
Right.
And when I came out, I'm like, oh, well, this is really chilly. And that's when I started doing steel mace. And that's when I started doing squats and going for a walk and hot yoga and things that would rewarm me. That is exactly the sequence that will boost your testosterone. Do your cold and then do your rewarming exercise. Your mitochondria will come back to life. And it is inside the mitochondria where all sex hormone synthesis originates, including testosterone. So if your mitochondria aren't right because the cell membrane transport processes are messed up, or you just don't have enough mitochondria, or they're damaged because you haven't been taking care of yourself for these decades, of course your testosterone is low. It is the mitochondria that produce all of these sex hormones. Mitochondrial therapies are sex hormone boosting therapies. And that's what I discovered sort of accidentally. I was going wicked cold, but I was only doing like 3 or 4 minutes.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just wonder, you mentioned the people who want to, have the mental resilience, and I think there's definitely that goal. But you believe that there could be I don't want to say dose response. That's not really the word I want to use, but maybe an equivalency. If you were doing it for longer, for a warmer period of time, you get a similar benefit, maybe metabolically, but you'd have to have the time, right? And so that's kind of the issue. Do you think that there's a benefit to doing it more than once per day or at a certain time of the day?
When you live in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and you got to walk between campuses, classes, I think there's a benefit to doing it a couple of times a day. I'm obviously talking from my personal experience because sometimes at the end of the day, I usually do it in the morning, but
Right.
sometimes at the end of the day, I feel wrecked. I've been sweating all day. I'm a bit overwhelmed, and I go in for just like a cool me off dip. However, I don't think that's really what you're asking. I doubt that there is a benefit by doing it multiple times a day, either to your mitochondria or to your metabolism. This is what people don't get right. And this mistake happens over and over and over in the biological sciences. A hormetic stressor responds to dose in a non-linear way. In toxicology, it's the classic upside down U curve. So something like selenium. Selenium's a micronutrient. Manganese, another micronutrient. If you don't get enough, the bottom of the U is an adverse health response. And then as you add a little bit of this micronutrient, health improves, health improves. And then, of course, you do too much and it becomes a poison again.
Correct.
Most of the work in testosterone research, for example, it goes like this. I took a bunch of football players from my campus and then I gave them something. I gave them, Tongkat Ali or ashwagandha or something like that. And look at this. They had 15% more total testosterone after I gave them that thing. And then some other guy gets that and he says, I've discovered the secret. I'm going to give them 3 times as much of the same frickin' thing. Most of these things operate on the mitochondria in this hormetic way. Metformin is a great example. Metformin is a mitochondrial toxin. If you give a little bit, it will stimulate mitochondrial function. Now, metformin can work on the life cycle of glucose in other ways in the body. But when we're talking about the relationship between metformin and the mitochondria, a little bit of stimulation can actually be a good thing because it's like exercise. You stress the mitochondria a little bit, you give them a break, and then the mitochondria come back stronger. Reactive oxygen species signal mitobiogenesis. But if you triple the dose, you've just like flipped down the other side of the hormetic upside down U curve. You're now just poisoning them rather than stressing them. And so it's typical among type 2 diabetics where their physician, their endocrinologist will say, well, we're going to start you on some metformin. And they might see an improvement right away. And the type 2 diabetic will take it every day. Just like the doctor said, they're not cycling in and out of it, which is the way I think most people should think about any supplement use. They're not saying, okay, this weekend I'm taking metformin and then I'm taking the week off. They never give their mitochondria a chance to recover. And sure enough, there's a study out of Colorado that looked at elderly Americans. They did exercise. Great. They got metabolic improvements. When they added metformin to the exercise, the metformin reversed the mitochondrial benefits of the exercise. And that is because metformin is a mitochondrial toxin. So I have one reader, type 2 diabetic, he was stuck. His CGM would never get below 100. He goes to his endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist says, I think we should up your metformin dose. Increasing the metformin dose is exactly the wrong thing to do. So I asked him, would you consider quitting metformin altogether? He goes, well, if you tell me to. I say, look, it's not me. It's Ben Bickman pointed me in the direction of this study. And I read the study about metformin being, a mitochondrial toxin. And since the metformin isn't working for you anyway, what if you just quit? He did. 2 weeks later, he Zooms me, and he's like, I want to show you something. He's eating a sandwich. And he holds up his phone, which is connected wirelessly to his continuous glucose monitor. In the middle of his lunch, he's 92.
Mm-hmm.
He says, Tom, I haven't been below 100 in 2 years.
Wow.
Quitting
That's fascinating.
the metformin improved his insulin sensitivity by allowing his mitochondria to restore. So when we're talking about cold dose, I suspect it is the same hormetic stress curve. You need variability. You need fasting, you need feasting. You need bright days, you need dark nights. You need exercise, you need rest. You need cold, you need heat. Just because 2 minutes of freezing cold water, up to your neck is good for you, doesn't make 20 minutes better. Just because doing it once a day is good for you doesn't mean that doing it 4 times a day is better. I want to say, would you give your mitochondria a minute? Would you let them recover from the stress that you just put them in? So Joe Rogan can be in there for 20 minutes on Instagram. He only did it because Jocko Willink dared him to. And it's probably the most boring 20 minutes of Joe Rogan that you're ever going to see. But he doesn't do that anymore. He gets in. He does 2-4 minutes. Maybe he plays a pop song on his phone or something like that. And he gets out and he does his exercise. Let's not flip to that damaging, that poisonous side of the hormetic stress curve.
Yeah, I guess my thought was that most people who have progressive insulin resistance and need increasing doses of medications is just because they basically use whatever medicine they're getting as a monotherapy. They don't change their lifestyle or what led to their diabetes. So therefore, they just have progressive mitochondrial dysfunction. It is interesting because the same reason you're talking about, metformin being a mitochondrial poison, it poisons complex 1 and leads to superoxide like pulses there, I think is my understanding. is the reason why I've never been a huge fan of metformin. But it's interesting because also in the cancer, metabolic therapy literature, there's a lot of like benefit to metformin, and actually they're trying to kind of leverage that as a way to increase reactive oxygen species within these damaged mitochondria of cancer specifically. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, but that's an interesting thought about how it was just the hormetic stressor of the metformin needed to be cycled off, and that's something that we of course never do within medicine ever. It's you're on this medicine until
Correct.
we put the next one on, the next one on, the next one on. There's never a stopping. And people
Except with
get freaked
chemotherapy.
out. People get freaked out if they get their medicine hold. They're like, because I work in the hospital, so it's like, well, we don't generally give metformin in the hospital. We'll put you on a sliding scale of insulin, and they're like, well, but I've been on metformin or I've been on this statin. And it's like, they have this belief a lot of times that like if they stop their medicine for a day, they're gonna die immediately, and it's like that's not the case. So yeah, that's a very different. That's why I like picking your brain about this stuff because it's a different way of thinking about it for sure. Do you have any? Let's say anecdotal studies or not studies, but case reports or cases that you've had people tell you about. One of the I'd heard an anecdotal story of someone using your product. It may have been on your podcast of someone who had an autoimmune disease who got reversed or was massively improved with cold. But what about specifically with cancer? Have you had any cases of that? People sending in letters
Yeah.
or stories?
Yeah, this is some of the most powerful stuff. I get maybe two a month. Every couple of
Wow, that's
weeks, I'll
awesome.
get a text message saying, my tumor has shrunk. I mean, the classic case is Dean Hall. Dean Hall, he became a Morosco customer after he cured himself of chronic leukemia. But how did he cure himself? He swam the entire length of the Willamette River. His physicians said, with your immune system the way it is, you so much as set foot in a public pool and it could kill you. And so Dean's like, well, then I got nothing to lose. So he started training for this swim. But of course, the Willamette River in Oregon is cold. He was in a deep hypothermic state and exercising for 3 straight weeks. His family begged him. Wonderful accomplishment. First man to swim the entire length of the Willamette River. But as soon as he came out, his family begged him to go see his oncologist and say, Dean, we're afraid that you stressed your body to the point where you're just going to drop dead now. His chronic leukemia, he knew it was going to kill him, but it takes time. Dean procrastinated. It took him 4 months or something like that to go back to San Diego, meet with the oncologist who did his original diagnosis, and say, all right, how long do I have left now? How many years have I just shaved off of my life so I could do this thing to inspire other cancer patients? And the oncologist said, well, I don't know how to tell you this. And Dean was like crushed
I know,
because he'd
right?
heard that so many times. And the oncologist caught himself and said, no, 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 no. There's no cancer left in your body. If I had not done your initial diagnosis myself, I'd say you never had leukemia. I'd say you were just misdiagnosed because you don't have it now.
Wow.
Well, there are two things that will stimulate mitobiogenesis better than anything else: cold and exercise. If you take the blood of a human who has recently exercised and you put it into a human being with cancer who is not exercising, they will get the benefits of the exercise. It will improve cancer treatment outcomes. It will slow the growth of tumors. Just the blood from someone who has exercised. And I didn't understand these mechanisms at all. You might say, oh, there's something in the immune antibodies, something happened. Here's what I think it is, Casey. I think it's the mitochondria. There are free mitochondria in the bloodstream. And I think if you take them from someone who is, if you take blood from someone who has recently exercised, nobody's tested this, but there must be mitochondria in that blood because exercise stimulates mitobiogenesis. You put it in a cancer patient, they have better cancer outcomes. Why? Because the mitochondria have been transferred, I'm guessing, into the cancer cells and either restored normal metabolism or signaled apoptosis. Cold can do the same thing. Cold can stimulate mitobiogenesis. I'd love to see the study that measures free mitochondria in the blood after
That's a
cold
great question. That's a
acclimation.
question I've always had because if you look at the studies on mitochondrial biogenesis, whether it be through exercise, whether it be through cold, I always wondered, is the signal of PGC1 alpha, the main signal for mitochondrial biogenesis, is that only in the cells that are being exposed, or is it a global phenomenon of the brain, of the toes, whatever, right? And I just wonder, do you believe that it's an entire body phenomenon where either the signal is being transmitted throughout the body, or like you mentioned, free mitochondria are being floating around, donating to their neighbors, basically.
I now believe that it is an entire body phenomena. And I used to struggle with this. Like, how could, mitobiogenesis in your brown fat help your brain?
Right.
And I know that cold improves insulin sensitivity. And so indirectly, that would be
Right.
better for the brain. But I'm like, how can we explain free mitochondria? Now, there's two aspects to this. The mitochondria are constantly signaling one another, and they do it through chemical signals, production of neurotransmitters or neuroprotective factors, for example. That's fine. But I now think that mitochondria travel throughout the body. I know this for a fact, according to the paper, I'm forgetting the author that Martin Picard pointed me towards, that fat cells release mitochondria into the bloodstream that can be taken up by other cells. I believe that this is a systemic benefit that you get into the cold, regardless of in what cells the mitobiogenesis is stimulated. I believe those mitochondria can travel throughout the body and restore mitochondrial function in any cell that is open to the bloodstream, which means all of them.
Fascinating.
Some might be more or better perfused than others. And if anything can cross the blood-brain barrier, I'm thinking mitochondria must be able to. But what a rich avenue of research is waiting for us there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's very fascinating. It's hard to really think about the possibilities like with something like that being there. When I heard that from Dr. Picard on your podcast, I was like, wow. I was in awe. I think that's one of the things that keeps me going is that it's just you realize what you don't know and how amazing the machines that I know you have criticized the use of the word machines for bodies, but you know what I'm saying? Like what we're living in, it's just unbelievable. One thing I meant to ask you, you said this, but I just have you looked at blood ketones before and after cold? You say it spikes after a cold.
I have continuous ketone monitoring data from one of my readers, which is now available. And he's like, hey, I didn't have a lot of ketones. I jumped in the ice bath. Well, look at this spike. And that's wonderful. I've only measured ketones in my own urine, and that's somewhat inexact. Uh, I don't like pricking fingers.
I
I've
know.
been through enough of that.
Yeah.
And I will if I need to, but peeing on a stick, that's an easy thing to do. And you probably heard my anecdote with the pumpkin pie, which is like my carbohydrate weakness. I ate a whole it was half a pumpkin pie left over day after Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite things. It took me maybe 20 minutes to regret that. And I said, I should get some cold. I should clear this out. Peed on the stick, very slight trace ketones. Went into the cold bath a couple hours later. I'm in mild ketosis.
I
And
believe
so
that. I believe that
the
exercise can do the same thing.
relationship,
It can blunt the response to the same meal by 50%. There's all
yep,
kinds of things you can do. So it would make total sense that it would
right.
be.
Go for a walk in the sun, is a brilliant thing to do. Play a little football in the yard after Thanksgiving or something like that. There are there's so many things that will blunt that glucose and that insulin spike when you're already healthy, when you already have metabolic flexibility. I don't mean to be the guy that is going to crap all over carbohydrates. There are plenty of people on social media who are doing that for us, but I'm very sensitive to this because I know what an Oreo cookie does to my son's blood sugar. And there's no amount of insulin that I can inject a 6-year-old boy with that will, mitigate the glucose spike from an Oreo cookie. So Nick, congratulations on your Oreo cookie, lowered my
Experiment.
LDL more than statins. What I wish he would emphasize more is the only reason his cholesterol was up so high was because he's constantly in ketosis without a break. It wasn't that Oreo per se, it
Right.
was bringing himself out of ketosis, and that his lower cholesterol levels were indicative of poorer metabolic health. The headlines are not capturing what's really going on with that damn
Right. And he
Oreo.
said it was a publicity
However,
stunt.
yeah, right. He admits it. His thumbnails indicate this. Like he's trying to find a way to get attention in the social media universe. And oversimplifying and exaggerating the message is almost a requirement of social media. In this case, I can sympathize with Jack Cruz more than I have in the past. I think he knows he can be an asshole. He's aware of this. He doesn't need me to tell him this, you know? And I kind of get it because one of the things that he is best at is making connections between disparate
Oh my
fields.
God.
It's
It's
partly because
unbelievable.
his education is all over the place, right?
Right.
And it's
Yes.
partly because he reads like crazy. And so he will see these connections and he sort of forgets that when we're talking about the space between the nodes, like the connections in the system, most people can't see them at all. He has earned his insights. And then some asshole will get on Twitter and say, well, actually, there was a study that says a high carbohydrate diet will improve insulin sensitivity. And the study is total shit. And Jack knows it. And he'll tell you this because you haven't spent hundreds of hours of, insightful connection making, get very impatient. I appreciate this more now than I used to as I'm getting more attention in social media. The challenge here, though, is to avoid becoming exaggerated, bombastic, hyperbolic, and oversimplified in your approach to get the attention
Right.
that you want the message to get. So Nick's probably, I've never talked to Nick, I don't know him, but he's probably going through this phase now. He's saying, holy crap, look at all this attention that I got with an oversimplified, exaggerated, bombastic message. And he admits this. If it weren't Oreo cookies, if he'd done something much less sort of charismatic, it wouldn't get that attention. What's
Right.
getting lost is the knowledge of the way metabolism is supposed to work. And so, how do I get a message out there that is not exaggerated and oversimplified? I'm not sure yet, Casey.
I know, because one, and I love Dr. Cruz. I've been a paid member of his site for years now. But one of the things that, one of the reasons why I haven't asked him to be on my podcast is because he's so all or nothing. Like it's like either it's quantum biology or it's nothing. And it's like if you're a functional medicine doctor, integrative medicine doctor, trying to like find your way, it's hard to get through and find a common ground. But I know he is a huge benefit to health of humanity, and I do admire his ability to connect dots between disciplines. I mean, it's unbelievable, actually.
That's
Um,
what's missing in science right
yeah,
now.
agreed.
It is one of his superpowers. It's
It
also
is.
something that I'm good at. And part of the frustration is I'm going to be an associate professor for the rest of my life. I will never be promoted to full professor at ASU or anywhere else because to do that, you must commit yourself to being the world's greatest expert in nothing, something that is so specific and reduced and minute that no one else can possibly approach your knowledge on something that no one cares about. And I refuse. So this is why I'm the engineer, talking about metabolism. The engineers say you don't even belong in our school anymore. But do you think I can go to some school of medicine or school of public health or something and show up like I have any credentials in that field? What science is missing is the connections. Science is built upon a tree metaphor. You start at a trunk, and we call that trunk kindergarten, and then we become increasingly specialized. I never knew why did my fourth grade daughter, need an elementary education instructor specialized in math? I'm like, what grown adult with a master's degree is incapable of teaching fourth grade math? And the answer was her regular classroom teacher majored in dance. She didn't know math. And I knew this because I'm getting the homework assignments coming back. This tree, it branches out and then we become increasingly specialized as we move up. It was Ken Robinson. He's got this great quip. Every child in America begins a PhD program in kindergarten. It's just that most of them don't make it, you know? So by the time we're in high school, our chemistry class has nothing to do with our English literature class or calculus class or whatever other class we're taking because we're so far out on the branches. What we need in science is the spiders that will build the web connecting all these sort of leaves of knowledge and the institutions of science that are supposed to curate and create this knowledge will not reward it. They don't know how to evaluate it. And anyone who dedicates themselves to making those sort of web-based connections will become marginalized.
Isn't that how it has always been, though? I mean, even was it Linus Pauling, right, who was like marginalized by the medical community with IV vitamin C and all this other stuff? Oh, well, you're just a this, or you're not part of our group. It's horrible. I agree. It's very bad.
It has not always been that way. When you think about the degree Doctor of Philosophy, now, I've never taken a course in philosophy. I've got a PhD. And people say, well, what is your PhD in? As if that frickin' mattered. But for the most part, it does matter because of this whole tree metaphor. Isaac Newton was considered a natural philosopher. It was his job to reveal, nature's secrets or something like that. It was not always so highly specialized. It was the Industrial Revolution that gave us that model. The way wealth was created was economies of scale and specialization of labor. And when the universities reformed themselves in the model of the Industrial Revolution to serve the Industrial Revolution, we had to invent things like tenure. We had to invent things like peer-reviewed publication. We had to invent professional societies that were so narrow in their application that you would exclude people who failed to conform to the orthodoxy of the discipline, Casey. To be successful in science, you must belong to a discipline. And we're not talking about the kind of discipline that won't eat Oreo cookies. We're talking about the kind of discipline that agrees we will ignore information from outside our myopic view.
That
So
is,
science is suffering
yes.
from this overinvestment in the reductionist and the fragmented approach.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of reminded me of Bruce Lee, how he was taking kung fu and karate and all these different disciplines, right? And kind of like breaking down the barriers, and the masters of each particular discipline didn't want to learn a punch from kung fu or whatever. It's interesting. I think I definitely participated in that. I'll be honest with you, Thomas. Like one of my best friends will attest to this. When I was an undergrad, if I didn't in my own myopic view think that a course was going to help me become a better physician, I pretty much wrote it off. I didn't really care. That's why I regret it so much, because I know that I would be higher, or I'd be more able to understand Dr. Cruz, or you, like, if I would have been more, I don't know, paying attention in physics, or biological, or what do they call it, physical chemistry or whatever. I said I didn't care. I was like, I don't see how this is making me a better doctor, and so therefore I'm just gonna like disregard it. And I do regret that, but I guess that's the challenge, of every specialty, I guess, is to be able to step outside of your comfort zone of knowledge of, in particular, in my area of biochemistry, biology, medicine, and go into, a more physics-based understanding. And I think that's going to be very difficult for me, but I know I'm going to do it. I'm definitely going to do it. One thing that made me laugh.
Casey, I was a horrible student. Like high school, middle school, undergrad, I was an awful student. And sometimes I was ashamed of it. I was definitely criticized for it. But now I realize how it protected me. Um, this happens to me a lot at ASU. The A students are the ones who have figured out how to give the professor what the professor really wants. That's the last thing we need.
Yeah.
Like those A students are like the best artificial intelligence agents in the world. They will scan the universe of things, and they will, like some kind of magnificent averaging engine, give you the mediocre answer that is least objectionable to, whatever the professor thinks they want, so that they minimize the number of points off. And that's how they get an A. It's terrible. So
That's so funny,
what I'm
Thomas,
looking
because Dr.
for.
Seafried says a very similar thing, because he's a professor at Boston, right? And he was like, the way
Yep.
that I look at the medical students, and they're these A students, and they're like, they're great at reciting facts, but there's no critical thinking or no curiosity, and it just makes me think about what you're saying there too.
At the Honors College at ASU, the students have extra classes and extra work to do. And most people think that makes a lot of sense. They're the honor students, so they're expected to work hard. Honor student came up to me a few weeks ago and said, well, Professor Seeger, is there any honors contract that I could do? The extra work in this class that would, qualify this class for honors credit. And I said, when I was in school, the kids who got extra work were the ones who were behind.
Hmm.
If you're so bright and you're so independent and you're such a self-directed, autodidactic scholar, how come you need extra instructions? Didn't occur to this honor student at all. We should be taking our best students and giving them less instruction, less constraint, saying, you're free to do whatever you want. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because the university is not really in the service of knowledge. It is in the prestige business. It is in the business of conferring social status upon its graduates. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One way to do that is saying, your program is so much more difficult. Here is a badge of accomplishment. You've taken the extra courses and you've done the extra work, and this gives you additional status. And another way to do that is look at how many games the football team won. You are from a prestigious and successful university. Knowledge is sort of like an accidental byproduct of what universities are really organized around, which is prestige. So being a terrible student meant that I could not get into the most prestigious universities. Thank goodness for that, because now I have nothing left to lose. Some people come after me on social media and they'll say, yeah, well, you teach at Arizona State. And look, we have not been on the Playboy top 10, party school list for probably 15 years. Arizona State is a respectable research institution, but it ain't Caltech. I mean, I get it. I'm already a loser in the prestige game. And to make things worse, I have a big mouth on Twitter. So there's no shortage of things that people can come after me and criticize me for. I haven't lost that curiosity. I'm not afraid,
No, you
so to
haven't.
speak, to be wrong. When someone can make the idea better, I'll share it.
I appreciate that that story in particular. I think one of the things that made me literally, I was driving home on Saturday night from work. I was listening to a podcast with you and I think it was Max Goldhain, and I laughed out loud in my vehicle when you said that you built these ski goggles with green light to help with headaches. And I was like, this guy is just so there's no end to the curiosity and the tinkering with things. And I think, yep, there it is.
Got my green light here. Yeah.
Very cool. So I have a question. I'm gonna make this the last couple of questions. I want to respect your time. Sorry, but I looked at. It's been a while. I'll be honest with you. Since I looked at the Morozgo page, and I'll be very honest, and I hope you don't take offense to this, but I was about to buy probably this year a plunge because they are cheaper. They have good reviews, and because they are HSA. But that was really the main reasons because of HSA. I wanted to use my HSA. But now that I went back to your website and I see that, I don't know if it's Jack Cruz or if it's Alexis Cowan or your own internal curiosity, but the fact that they can put magnesium sulfate in there, the fact that they're grounded now, I'm like, I have to pause because that is something that I've been wanting in a cold plunge that's artificial. So, there's getting into the creek, which is grounded, or getting to the ocean, which is grounded. But now that your devices are grounded, I'm like, I think I'm probably going to wait to save up. And what led you to make those changes in the Morozgo design, I guess?
Um, they're not changes. We've always been grounded.
Interesting.
Um, let's talk about plunge. If you're thinking about buying a plunge, why don't you just go to Alibaba? Why don't you get one of those? If you want a Chinese made, no warranty, with outstanding reviews, well, just go to Alibaba, give them 400 or 500 bucks, wait a few weeks, boom, your piece of crap will show up. Now, it might sound like I'm being a bit harsh to plunge. They started a little bit after us.
They did.
Morosco, Plunge, there's some other competitors who sort of got out in front of the Joe Rogan wave. And the difference is in a warranty report where we looked at each website terms of service and terms of the warranties, and we realized that we were enormous outliers, that we actually had customer service. So when you say you checked the reviews, did you go on Reddit?
Now, honestly, Thomas, I was looking at there's a couple people who do like basically just only YouTube reviews of cold plunges. That's really more was where it was. Not so
But
much the
Casey, you
reviews on their website per
understand
se.
those people make their
I know, I
living
know. I have to be
doing
more
positive
skeptical.
reviews. Like
Right.
uh, some of them are really difficult to watch because they're so poorly misinformed. If you want to really know what kind of product you're dealing with, go on Facebook Marketplace, type in cold plunge, and you will get a long list of all the equipment that people regret buying. Morosco won't be on that list. One of our goals is to stay the hell off of Facebook Marketplace.
Amen.
But the point is, when you buy a Morosco, you get 30 days. If you're not ecstatic, that's okay. You can send it back. We will refund your purchase price. And that, talk about discipline, that forces us to be in touch with the customers. What is it that isn't working? Where did we miss the mark? Why are these people returning? That's not the way Chinese manufacturers work. You can't send equipment back to Shenzhen and
Right.
expect to get your money back. So there's a difference. And one of the difficulties, one of the reasons that I'm sensitive about it is the marketplace often thinks that Morosco is just like everybody else. It may as well be called Polar Plunge or Geyser Pod or something
Right.
like
Right.
that. They
Right.
all have the same goddamn names.
They
They all
do.
buy the same crappy equipment. If you're really looking for something that's more affordable, because the Epsom salt and the grounding and the making ice are not really in your price point, go to Desert Plunge. Desert Plunge is based in Tempe. It's a friend of mine, Matt Kuiper. His first experience was in a Morosco. He was so delighted by it, especially the impact that it had on his mood and lifting him out of his depression, that he started his own company, Desert Plunge, and 3-4 grand is going to get you a reliable piece of equipment from an honest broker. So, okay, you can buy from Desert Plunge. Morosco is for people who are no longer limited financially, so they have to worry about the cost. They're looking for value, not for price. Here are some of the things that you cannot buy on Alibaba. It's the grounding,
Right.
because we don't have a chiller. We have our own custom made refrigeration system, and your metal tub is connected to the ground wire that goes into your house. As soon as you get into the Morosco, you get electrons from the earth that will instantaneously rebalance your body electrically, improve your circulation, disaggregate your red blood cells by changing the charge environment in your blood. It's the Epsom salt. Everything we do is warranted for Epsom salt, not chloride salts, but Epsom salt is a sulfate salt. You can add zinc sulfate, you can add copper sulfate, you can add potassium sulfate if you want. You have to do this in some careful proportions, and we have some instructions on our website, but we will warranty for Epsom salt because aluminum will not touch your water, not in the heat exchanger, in the chiller, not in any aspect of the Morosco, because we do not believe in poisoning our customers. There's no chlorine. There's no chemicals to add. There's no stabilizers. There's no cyanic acid that we're, telling you have to put in. The Morosco makes ozone, and ozone is a more powerful disinfectant than chlorine, but it doesn't leave a residual. It's not used by the water treatment plants because ozone has such a short half-life. That is, it will decay long before it reaches your faucet. So your water treatment plant has to use chlorine. And chlorine is the only thing that boards of health will approve for hot tubs, because nobody's ever examined ozone at cold temperatures. At cold temperatures, the ozone does not decay at the same rate. It stays around long enough to maintain sanitation, protection of the water. So ozone is perfect for ice baths. It's in the fact that we make ice. You're not going to get those ice chunks floating around the water, if you buy a plunge or any one of these other Alibaba type brands. Those things were important to me when we were inventing Morosco, because I wanted the experience that Wim Hof was showing, on Instagram. I wanted the ice chunks. I wanted the metal tub. I didn't want to compromise with some plastic piece of crap. And heaven help the people who are going to Costco or buying these inflatable, flexible plastic ones
Right.
and blowing them up and then immersing themselves in the phthalates and the brominated flame retardants that leach out of that plastic and say, this is for my health. I cannot bring myself to poison my customers. So our cheapest one is 10 grand. It's called the new Morozco
I saw
Forge,
it.
and it
It's
has
beautiful.
all those essential elements, that make it a Morozco. If I could make it cheaper, I would, but I don't have Chinese slaves working in my Foxconn factory or
Right.
something like that. Every single one is handcrafted in Phoenix, Arizona. And maybe I'm just a crappy marketer or a crappy businessman because I can't seem to cut through the cacophony of Google ads and it's the new ultimate revolutionary technology in cold plunge wellness. Every AI written advertising slogan sounds the same to me. And instead, I spend 2 hours with you doing a podcast that probably 3 dozen people are going to see because for me, it must be authentic.
I agree. I really, and I think I can definitely feel that, detect that, even though you're in Arizona, I'm in Florida, and I appreciate that. And maybe I just missed it when I first went to the website years ago. So the grounding was always a thing. That was always built in,
Yep,
you're saying. Wow. Was that based off of
from
your
the
own
beginning.
curiosity or was that off of Dr. Cruz or like what was that? How did that implement its way in?
Mm-mm. To make the ice, we had to bring the cold to the ice. We're not pumping water to a chiller and then returning it to a vessel because ice won't pump. And so we built these custom copper coils that hold the refrigerant and we put them right in contact with the metallic tub. We looked at
Mm,
the exact same acrylic tub that Plunge uses. Michael from Plunge, he came over to our backyard, and this is the early days. This is like 2019. He's like, oh, how do you do it? And I was thinking about buying one. And then he started his own company, but he took the shortcut route. And we consider the shortcut route. And he said, that's not the experience that we want to have. Now, the copper that carries the refrigerant is in electrical contact with the tub, and the tub is in contact with the water. It's also in contact with the compressor, which is grounded. But all of this was really an accident until we got a note from Ben Greenfield. And he said, I just had Brian Hoyer come and measure the grounding properties of your tub, and it's off the freaking charts. It's 30 times more effective than walking barefoot in the grass.
wow.
And we were like, that makes total sense. We thought we were grounding for electrical safety because you have some dumbass videos out there that say, and don't forget to unplug your freezer or unplug your cold plunge before you get it. At least in 2019 there were, and there's still some out there now. And we
Right.
wanted to be like, no, 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 no. That's not an issue. We were ground fault, circuit interrupt protected, and we grounded everything in it. It hadn't occurred to us until Ben Greenfield and Brian Hoyer wrote to us and said, that's a dang health benefit. It's consistent with the design ethic of Morozco. The best way to do your cold plunge therapy is to just go dive in the ocean.
Right.
Now you're in Florida. The Gulf, even the Atlantic is pretty freaking warm. But if you're on the West Coast, or if you're further up in the Northeast, the ocean's great. It's grounded, it's cold, and it's got salt.
Salt.
And there's no chlorine.
Right.
Those are the things that we want for our customers. So now we say Morozco is the next best thing to nature. I can't sell you nature. I can't patent nature. I can't, create a trademark claim on nature. But I fricking live, in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. There's no ocean for me. So instead, I built a machine and I put it on my porch and I get into the next best thing for nature every day.
That's awesome, man. One of the things I was thinking about also was the fact that I'd like the water to be fluorine free. So do you just can you just take like just big 5 gallon jugs from like a reverse osmosis and put it in there and just kind of forget about it? Is that what people do? Or
That's how I do it.
yeah,
I fill mine up with I got a spring water bubbler thing, delivery service, five
uh-huh.
gallon jugs. I fill it up with that. I don't use the tap water.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And just last thing, is HSA an option for Morozco or
Yeah. I'm glad you reminded me of this. This is another one of those things that are going to get me in hot water. I hope no more than 3 dozen people watch this. How is it HSA eligible? This is how. There's a company called TrueMed.
Yep, familiar
You
with
heard of
it.
this company?
Oh yeah.
True, right? If you go online and you answer like 36, question, I forget however many it is, and you say, yes, this is true and that's true, blah, blah, blah. TrueMed will give you a letter
A
of
letter.
medical necessity
Correct.
based upon your 6 minute interaction with their algorithm. And your letter of medical necessity is sufficient to make your purchase eligible for either use of your HSA debit card or reimbursement later. And some part of you is probably going, how the hell can an algo, identify, medical? I'm a physician for goodness sakes, and it's taken me years to even have the right to make a prescription. But this algo is saying, yes, it's a medical necessity for you, even though it's not a medical device. TrueMed was founded by somebody you probably have heard of. His name is catecholamines.
Mm,
And the
I did not know
FDA
that.
is not about to scrutinize catecholamines algo or his super automated letters of medical necessity. One of their marketing claims is that they will approve more than 80% of the requests. Now, you could say, yeah, because 80% of America is metabolically dysfunctional, so why shouldn't they have, medical necessity? And you'd be making a good argument. I'm not disagreeing with the outcome. I'm saying TrueMed is exploiting the HSA regulations. It's not exactly in the spirit of what the HSA is there for, but it is within the letter. And so Plunge is hooked up to TrueMed, where you can get your medical necessity right there and use your HSA debit card. Our website is not. If you want to use HSA funds, you must go to TrueMed. You must get your letter of medical necessity first. Then you make your purchase, you take your receipt, you mail it into your HSA, FSA, whatever it is, and then you get reimbursed. And that's a hell of a lot of trouble
Yep.
for someone to go through. Plunge and TrueMed have hooked it up automatically, and Plunge will pay the $30 that TrueMed charges to make it easier. And I don't. You know why I don't? Because I'm an engineer and a scientist and not a marketer who's like understood the customer click journey and removed all the points of friction to, make
Right.
it easier to whatever, whatever, whatever. And since I saw Callie Means with Jack Cruz on the Danny Jones
Oh, I watched it
podcast,
too.
I'm now like, I refuse. Like, there is a Morosco page on TrueMed. And for the people who need it because they want to pay with their before tax instead of their after tax dollars, yeah, we'll facilitate. I'm not going to do the API connect. I can't, maybe someday I'll cave. But right now, I cannot bring myself to do it.
Got it. That's a fantastic and genuine, heartfelt answer, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate the interview, Professor. You are a true professor in the state. I mean, you just you intrigue me. You challenge me. You are a gentleman and a scholar, and I couldn't be more grateful for you to come on the podcast and really teach me what you understand about cold. And it's going to definitely probably get me back into the literature again about cold. And I think there's a bright future for cold and ketogenic metabolic therapy being linked up for sure.
There's no doubt in my mind. Right now, the whole industry is suffering from overhype, over marketing, deceptive business practices. We've got a really bad reputation in the cold plunge industry to the point where the algos are all pushing, crap like ice baths don't work and ice baths aren't good for you and all this other misinformation because that's more popular than
Hmm.
these are the benefits of ice baths.
Right.
So we are in the early innings of whatever this industry is going to turn out to be. Some people want to come after, cold plunge and they say, that's just like water beds. It's a fad. It's going to go away. Nobody needs that. There are no health benefits. And those are getting a lot of clicks. But I don't think that's our industry at all. I think we're more like hot tubs. And the hot tubs are $1 trillion industry. I think when we get the charlatans sort of out and we're bringing better medical information, doctors like you are already at a point where you could prescribe cold plunge therapy to your patients with a reliable sense of what the outcomes are going to be. You know what to monitor, you know whether to see whether it is working for them. And your patients are going to report to you how they feel and how they're doing to give you more confidence in your prescription. We don't really need HSA. I do think HSA is wonderful. When we can get to the point where insurance companies will pay for this, we sort of know that we're inside the establishment. And I say that I hate insurance
Me
companies.
too.
All the ways that they will take over, well, where they would try and become these controllers of your healthcare. I'm with Brigham on this one. I think that they are using the carrot of, sorry, Brigham Bueller, who's been on the Joe Rogan podcast and is a Morosco customer. And he says, look, this is how the insurance companies are incentivizing all of these harmful outcomes. However, people are paying the premiums. People still believe in it, and they're entitled to services that they're paying for. I would love for you to be able to get a Morosco and have your insurer pay for the cost of it because it's going to keep you healthy. We're not there right now.
I know.
Where we
I mean,
are
the,
right
the
now is that if
analogy, the
people can
analogy
afford
is
it,
how therapy, right, for PTSD or some traumatic experience is probably the better intervention, right? But the SSRI is a lot cheaper, and it's a lot easier to, get to the
right.
patient, and a lot more, easier for compliance. You don't need a bunch of psychologists, so I it's frustrating
It's never
to say
going to
the least.
happen. It's never going to happen because I'm not the kind of person who could get there. I'm not the kind of person who's going to complete an FDA medical device trial. I'm not the kind of person who's going to cozy up to the insurance companies and
Right.
get them to reimburse it. There's so much that would have to change in the insurance company for that to happen. So I've been thinking about it instead. How do we circumvent the insurance companies? And I'm starting with the customers who are, frankly, like me. I'm 59 years old. Our best customer is the type of person who's financially independent and is looking for the things that money can't buy. And, in rare occasions, I mean, you can buy a Morosco, but when you buy a Morosco, you're not buying longevity. You're not buying insulin sensitivity. You're not buying fertility. You actually have to get in the freaking thing.
Yeah, that's true. You're
You
buying
got
the
to do the
opportunity
hard.
for those things.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. Well, again, it was a pleasure, and I really hope to hear from you as you get more kind of case reports on metabolic health and even in cancer patients. I think it would be very helpful for me to put in my knowledge repertoire that I'm trying to build up every day.
Casey, are you subscribed to our journal?
I went to your website and I saw the different, I think it's under education or something like that, where you have like a bunch of different podcasts and of course articles. And I read several of the articles about insulin resistance and also God, I can't remember what else. I want to say it was the cortisol kind of like myth thing that I think it was one of the first ones, but I have not subscribed. So I need,
Type
I'm
your
guilty of
email
that.
address into our little form. You will get 3 emails from me a week. Anything that I'm writing, you're going to hear about it first. You can buy the freaking book. Uncommon Testosterone is on Amazon. Uncommon Cold, maybe it'll be on Amazon in a month, but right now it's on the Morosco site. There are like, I don't know, hundreds, almost 600 scientific citations in my Uncommon Cold book. But that's not the latest and greatest. And when you want to be out on that leading edge and hear about the study in Poland with the MS patients who elevated their
Vitamin
serum
D.
levels of vitamin D using cryo chambers, you got to subscribe to our journal for
All
that.
right. I'm going to do it as soon as I get off of this podcast in that case.
Sounds great.
All right. God
Thank you for
bless you.
having me.
Of course. Thank you for being on. Appreciate it. If you like podcasts like this, if you like the guests that I'm having that are challenging me and you to think differently about problems so we can move this field forward and accelerate healing for people, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time.